This is the Hoff Time Report with Idaho Freedom Foundation President Wayne Hoffman, one of Idaho's most respected, influential public policy voices.
Hey everybody, welcome back to another Hoff Time. I'm here again with Alli Megal. We got a lot of positive reaction from last week's episode where we were talking about childbirth, and so we thought, why don't we just do that again, because it's just so much fun. There's just so much to talk about, and a lot of things that people don't really know or think about. And so we thought we'd talk a little bit about food. Food's fun to talk about.
Food's fun to eat.
Food's fun to eat. Food can be deadly.
Food can be horribly deadly.
And not just that. So I hate to say this. Because this is just how I talk. But if you see the overweight lady or guy at the Walmart on the electric scooter buying stuff, and you see what they're buying, which is usually not very healthy, you imagine all the different physical things that that's doing to you. But it's more than that. It's mental health. And you've studied a lot about that, and so I thought we'd kind of talk a little bit about what that looks like and why that's important.
Mm-hmm. I just feel like most of what we eat is garbage, or most of what's available in the grocery stores is processed foods, which are a lot of chemicals and sugars and carbs and things of that nature that are not good for us. And it kind of feeds into what we were talking about, the medical complex, right, or the health
medical
complex.
Industrial complex.
If we think about it, like if we have just a bunch of garbage in our grocery stores and that's what's available, then when we get sick, where do we go?
Yeah, you go to a doctor and they prescribe you some pills, and then you take those pills and you're not getting any better because you're eating a bunch of garbage, and the pills are also causing you some kind of side effects. So you go back to your doctor and they give you more pills to deal with the side effects, but the stuff that you're putting into your body is still the same stuff that's damaging your body.
Yep. And I think a lot of what we put into our body could be used as medicine. A lot of the food that we could be preparing or making for ourselves, could heal us.
Yeah.
And we wouldn't need to go to the doctor so much.
Here's the thing that also is a little bit alarming, I guess, is because both of us are grandparents, and both of us have kids that are very busy and they're working really hard, and you get home and, then you feed your kid some kind of, what's the word I'm looking for? Processed food, because it's convenience food, convenient, and then your cycle kind of continues with the next generation because they're not getting quite the nutrition they need. I know my daughter's going to see this and she's going to give me all kinds of crap, but they're called Uncrustables, which are. They're I don't know if you see them, but
they're delicious.
They're delicious, or so I'm told. I actually haven't tried one.
You haven't ever ate?
No, I haven't.
Oh,
but
wow,
it's very
good.
popular at my daughter's place. And it is, what are they? They're
peanut butter and jelly. Essentially, peanut butter and jelly sandwiches that don't have crust on them. And they just are stamped into the bread, so they're like a pocket of gooey delight. And
they're frozen, so you just take it out of the freezer and you just hand them to the kid, and they eat them because but that's all just sugar and processed stuff.
All sugar.
And the thing that you should be worried about is, what does that do? So what does that do to your body? What are the physical consequences of those kinds of things? And then what are the mental health consequences? Because what's in your gut goes to your brain, and then that causes things like attention deficit disorder, or maybe autism, or a variety of other, maybe some mental health, depression, anxiety.
Well, you and I have talked about that. Like when we were kids, I think really the common thing was that somebody would have hyperactivity. They were hyper, and so they weren't on medication. They just couldn't have any sugar, right? Like that person would be at school and they'd be like, oh, he's hyperactive. That's why he can't have any sugar. And the teachers would be aware of that. And now it's like, you can't have peanuts. You can't have this. There's all these allergies. There's all kinds of medications for kids, psychotropic medications for kids. And I do believe that with a more balanced diet that we could get rid of the dependency on the medication. I believe that. I've done whole food plant-based for a number of months. I felt great when I did it. I've also gone back to eating the way that's convenient and easy, and that's the thing, right? We don't really sit around a table and eat dinner anymore as families. Like back in the 50s, 60s, and maybe early 70s, people actually had dinner time where they sat around and enjoyed a fairly balanced meal.
They did.
We don't do that anymore, right? We drive through.
Yeah.
We drive through restaurants. We might go to a restaurant once in a while, but I don't know how many people actually do that right now because it's so expensive. But, who has time to cook something balanced and good? And not everybody's on a homestead where they can have access to grass-fed meat and, organic. I say that, tongue in cheek, but organic meals. I mean, stuff that's in the grocery store right now labeled as organic.
Well, see, now that's a whole other. Well, I should tell that story, I guess, because I worked at the State Department of Agriculture in 2005 and 2006, and one of the Department of Agriculture has a lot of different programs, like 80 different programs, and one of the programs was the organic program, was sort of administering the USDA's organic food certification program, and it was kind of interesting to me how organic doesn't mean what you think it means. It doesn't mean that they don't use any kind of chemicals on it. It just means that they use the level of chemical pesticides, herbicides that the lobbyists and the agency have kind of negotiated and agreed on to use. So it might be better. I'm not saying that it's somehow worse than non-organic, but what I am saying is that it's not as pure as people perhaps think that it might be. It's something that you might grow in your garden or your tiny farm. Mm-hmm. It's very different from that. But there's a huge concern. I think there's a lot of research coming out about glyphosates and the impact that's having on food. Of course, that's a difficult subject because we produce a lot of that here in Idaho through the mining operations in southeast Idaho. But it's a question. You're finding glyphosates not only in your food, you're finding it in the air and the water. And there's been some studies on that. But I think even if you ignore all that, the fact is that people are eating stuff that is not good for them physically or mentally, and it all kind of plays off of each other. There was a study that I saw not long ago, too, that said that every kid, by the time they're 8 years old, will have had as much sugar as most adults have had their entire life. It's just really incredible.
Yeah, it's so hard on their little systems and their minds. I think they act different. Kids act a lot different when they're on sugar than when they're not. There's a marked difference. You can see, like, they get wired. They get literally keyed up the way that adults do when they drink too much caffeine, right? So I don't know if you've ever had too much caffeine, but it's not a good feeling, right? Like, you're shaky, your palms might be sweaty, or anxious or nervous or just irritable. So you do that with sugar to a child, and I think it's not much different for them. So yeah, I think we have a responsibility as parents to do better, but it's really difficult when you don't know what you don't know, and you don't have time,
The time thing is the biggest concern that I have is we're public policy practitioners, and so ask yourself why people don't have time, and people who watch this are going to think that I'm trying to get us back to the 50s housewives and keep women out of the workplace or something. That's not the intent, but I think it's important to understand that today, let's go back. 1950s median household income roughly $5,000-$6,000, which is the equivalent of about $65-ish thousand in today's dollars. Single family income. Today, dual family income, two income earners, same household, and they're earning in the neighborhood, depending on which metrics you use, $40,000 to $50,000. So two income households are producing less income
Wow.
than 1950s. And so we're stuck in this situation where it's like, okay, I got to go. I've got to pay the rent. I've got to pay the mortgage. I got to put food on the table. I got to pay the electric bill. So you can't have mom stay home. You can't have dad stay home. But both parents have to be working. They both come home from work. They're exhausted, absolutely exhausted. And then it's time to go produce a meal. That's very challenging. So what do? You gravitate to whatever is convenient.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I told you I was listening to a podcast with a former Olympian. I don't remember his name, but he's not from here. And he said he was shocked to learn Americans treat potato chips as a food item. Like, it's a side dish for us. Whereas where he's from, I think Germany or somewhere, he was like, that's a once in a while treat that you only see at a party. It's not something you would see as like an option for a side. And that's standard fare here. Like, you go to any restaurant down here, that's one of the options, chips.
Right. They have whole grocery stores with entire aisles dedicated to chips, which is something I'm trying to think back, as you and I are about the same age. I'm trying to remember if in our childhood, if they had entire grocery store aisles filled with chips. I mean, it would be like a snack aisle, I guess, maybe, that it would have nuts and other things, but now you go and there's like an entire aisle filled with chips.
Yeah, it's bad.
You and I have also started watching or listening to a researcher named Callie Means, who has been, I guess he's writing a book on, used to be, you'd pointed this out, that he was a lobbyist for Coca-Cola.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and he said, when I was listening to him, he said that what they did is reach out when they tried to make it so you couldn't purchase Coke or soda with a SNAP card. Mm-hmm. They reached out to folks who, like, basically maybe pastors of churches that were predominantly black or had black members, and tried to say, hey, this is racial discrimination. That you're saying they can't buy soda. He doesn't call it soda. He calls it diabetic water.
Right.
But that's what it is. It's pure sugar. And
Stuff
honestly,
is very bad for you.
if we're going to have a food program to help folks who can't afford it, then isn't it also our obligation to educate them on how to eat healthfully and feed their kids healthfully?
Yeah, and I remember having this discussion with legislators about 10 years ago. Not that there's a lot of, we've got the states, every state, if you're poor, doesn't matter, you live in California or Idaho or Florida or Texas, the program for the poor who can't afford food is food stamps, or the SNAP program. And we had discussed, maybe doing some reforms to the state variant to maybe make it a little different from what you see in other states, where perhaps you should get just healthy foods using SNAP. And the very first reaction was, oh no. Idaho is a very big sugar producer, and you wouldn't want to, ban things like sugar sodas, because a lot of that, the sugar comes from sugar beets or something like that, and that would be bad for the industry. The industry matters. But I think it's kind of weird that what you do with poor people is you say to them, okay, we understand you're poor. Go and buy some things that we know are going to be bad for you because the industry wants it that way.
All across the board, right? Not just the sugar industry, but the medical industry,
they all
right?
do.
Like, it just feeds it feeds them people. It feeds them clientele. Yeah. And so, if you educate folks or you try to help them out, really help them out, then you're taking away from the big money, and so
There's
they
a
don't
lot of
wanna do
money
that.
behind it. And even like, again, the USDA, I think they still have this requirement. It may have changed, but by law, the USDA had to go and revisit their food categorization and nutrition guidelines every 5 years. And so if you remember when we were young, it was called the food
Pyramid?
four
For
food
food groups,
four
right?
food groups.
Yeah, that's right.
And
It was
so
for the food pyramid.
yeah, and then they changed it to the food plate, and now it's on the food pyramid, I guess. I think it's still the pyramid,
I
right?
think it's still the pyramid. And I feel like the pyramid's been here for a while.
The pyramid's been here for a while, but those decisions that you get from the government's view of what is considered nutritious comes from the USDA, which is very heavily influenced by lobbyists. Be sure to include, we're bread makers, so be sure to include the whole wheat bread that we do. Or here's an explanation as to why the white bread that we produce is really nutritious for you.
It's fortified.
It's fortified, right? Fortified, which of course, is a function of government intervention in the food marketplace, which is also very fascinating. We had a discussion the other day about white rice, which is, in its pure form, unprocessed rice is not, but you don't get unprocessed rice.
I don't think you get unprocessed anything
Yeah.
anymore. I really don't. Like, I even sometimes feel like what they do to our produce is a process that's not good for us.
Well,
you know?
and
How you wash
Callie
your-
Means was talking about, I think it was Callie, he was talking about just apples. I guess we should discuss this with our friends in the apple industry, but apples have way more sugar than they used to. They're produced that way. They're grown that way. Obviously, probably a little better for you being natural than taking a Coca-Cola or Pepsi. But certainly our food has changed over time, and some of those changes have been very positive, and some of those have been not so positive. Brussels sprouts taste a lot better than they used to. That is
Is that because you know how to prepare them better?
No, it's true. The Brussels sprouts used to be more bitter, and they've been grown to be less bitter than they used to be.
They genetically modify
They genetically
it.
modify. I accept that modification. I eat more Brussels sprouts than I used to, but Brussels sprouts have definitely changed. That's probably one. I think radishes also. I think radishes have been changed. The radishes used to be a lot more bitter as well.
Yeah, they used to be very, very spicy. They're not nearly.
Not
They
nearly
used to
as
be
much.
like a hot
Yeah, I remember that. Yeah,
root vegetable, and now they're like, this is just like.
could be a function of the variety
jicama
that's
or
become
something.
popular or
Yeah,
something
yeah.
like that. I don't know, but I actually enjoy radishes now, which
Yeah.
I didn't used to enjoy radishes. But the rest of it is like you really have to watch what it is. Seed oils.
Oh yeah, that's
Which-
the other thing too. Is that like, for a while it was a big deal. Oh, use olive oil or use grapeseed
Yep.
oil or use canola oil, or none of these oils really are that great for you. It turns out.
Yeah.
But I feel like we go through these phases where. I remember back in probably the late 70s, they were like, oh, eggs are terrible for you.
Right,
Don't eat
right, don't eat
eggs. You'll
eggs,
get
yeah.
high cholesterol and blah, blah, blah. And now it's like eggs are great for you.
Yep.
Eat eggs are a good source of protein. And I guess you have to kind of find your way through it, because how do you know what to trust anymore?
Right.
How do you really even know?
Yeah. Oh, and yeah, that's exactly right. And of course, and a lot of it again is very much influenced by various industry groups. I remember it was about 15 years ago. The Freedom Foundation was fairly new, and there was a proposal because it was Frank Vandersloot's sister had gotten into some kind of trouble over either the sale or purchase of raw milk in North Idaho, and so there was an effort to reduce Idaho's regulations relative to raw milk. And the milk industry were opposed to any kind of lessening of the regulations. And the reason was because their argument was, well, if something happens with the raw milk, and somebody gets sick, then it will impact the entire milk industry. But you know what? raw milk is actually really darn good for you.
That's pretty much what we were raised on. We were
Yeah.
very poor growing
Yeah.
up, and there was his name was Gene Fountain, I believe his last name was, and he was a farmer out in Boise, and he'd sell my parents, whole gallons right from his cows and charge $1 a gallon, which is
Yeah.
cheap. And we made butter from the cream that came in was whole milk. It was raw milk, and that's where we got our milk from. I don't really drink milk anymore. But I heard recently, or maybe I read it somewhere, that almond milk is not great for you.
Lot
You
of-
think of those like,
a lot
oh,
of
great, you got
sugars in
these.
it. Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah, so it's hard.
Lot of
It's hard to
chemicals.
tell. Like, how do you know? How do you eat healthfully these days?
Yeah, I have a friend who, and by the way, with regard to the raw milk, it's interesting how that's the sort of stuff we grew up around. There was a lot of that stuff.
Yeah.
And now when you talk to people about raw milk, they look at you as if you're crazy. Why in the world would you drink raw milk? I have a friend who his girlfriend, now his fiance, has been allergic to milk forever. And then somebody said, why don't you try some raw milk? And now she's a big raw milk enthusiast. It's just kind of an interesting thing. There's just a lot about the human body that has become conditioned to the various regimes that government and special interest groups put in place, and that's hard. We know that there's a lot of some of these plant-based meats are just they're full of chemicals. They get sold as sort of a health food. It's all based on plants. It's all, plants are good. You want to eat plants, but the chemicals they put in there and the labeling is extraordinarily deceptive. And so you really have to do a lot of research. And so you're watching this podcast and you're going, why in the world are they talking about this? And the reason is because all this dovetails into public policy. The biggest program in all of state government today is Medicaid. It's the biggest program. And a huge component of Medicaid is prescription drugs. And the prescription drugs are largely there because people are having physical and mental ailments that didn't exist even 25 years ago. The rash of obesity, the diabetes, the various psychological things. People, there should be 1 or 2% of the population at most that are having mental health problems. But a good guesstimate about what it is today?
Probably 30 to 40.
Yeah, I would say so.
I don't know.
At least it's hard to say as we're trying to figure that out, but 25 to 40 is some of the numbers that we've been talking about. And certainly on the Medicaid program, most of the psychotropic drugs that are prescribed, the antidepressant, anti-anxiety drugs in Idaho, come through Medicaid, something on the order of 2/3.
Wow.
So there's something going on here, and it's not just costing us a lot of money, but it's also impacting people's ability to exist in a way that makes them get enjoyment and fulfillment out of life, and it impacts their ability to just be healthy, to be able to go on a run or go and do something athletic with their kids. And then, of course, again, there is something to be said about the food convenient society of, there's a drive-through just down the road, and in 2 minutes you can have this whole thing that we experience. I mean, it's part of the value of living in modern society. It used to be, only royalty could have a meal prepared for them. Whereas people who are very wealthy would have a meal prepared for them exactly to their liking, to their specifications. And now you don't have to be very wealthy at all. You can be poor and go to the McDonald's drive-thru and buy a Big Mac and a container of fries. And there's every policy, every interaction in the marketplace has some kind of a trade-off. And I'm not saying you shouldn't go and enjoy, a cheeseburger every now and then.
It's all about balance.
It's
If
all about
you're eating it 2, 3, 4, 5 times a week, which I think is probably pretty accurate for most Americans. I think they hit the drive-through more than not, and you've got high blood pressure, you've got diabetes, hypertension, whatever it is. What's the other one? I feel like it's common. I ran into a lady the other day, and she was trying to find a dress, and she was very obese, and she said, I don't even eat unhealthfully, but she had a thyroid problem. That's what it was. And she's like, I can't control my weight. And I don't know what I'm doing wrong. And, she was on a bunch of medications for her thyroid, and I'm sure that introduced a whole bunch of side effects that, led to other medications and other, who knows, cravings. I don't know, but I do feel like it all feeds into itself. And, I always hate to say the word conspiracy, but I don't think it's a conspiracy when you can see it all around you. I saw What the Health, that documentary, very compelling documentary.
Very interesting documentary. You find that on Netflix.
Yeah, and I think the most remarkable thing about that documentary is that when the guy wanted to go question the hospitals, they wouldn't let him in. They wouldn't talk to him at all. Like, they just shut him down at the door.
The documentary basically is this documentarian is going and he's asking hospitals and groups like the American Cancer Society, Breast Cancer with Sigmund G. Coleman, about why they don't discuss nutrition as part of their campaign against cancer, which is interesting because there's a lot of data that shows that cancer loves sugar, and sugar loves cancer. It actually helps it metastasize. It's pretty invasive in that regard. And they don't, and doctors don't talk about nutrition. It's going to be interesting. We haven't done this research yet, but I've kind of toyed with the idea of checking it out because we do in Idaho fund medical schools. To what degree do the doctors that we fund to go to those medical schools in Utah and Washington, are they instructed on nutrition? My understanding is that it's very rare that that's something that comes up. You show up and you've got some problem, and we've got some treatment for you. It's a pill, it's a process, it's a procedure, but it's usually not maybe cut back on the fries or cut back on the cheeseburgers or something. This is public policy we're talking about here. This isn't just some rant about bad nutrition and how terrible it is that government doesn't label things very well. The fact is that these all have very, very real impacts on people's health. And in some regards, we are actually financing people's bad behaviors, bad habits, bad choices. And we just don't talk about that very much.
Yeah, that's so true. And I've had some experiences recently, personally, within my own family, where there was serious illness, and I suggested diet. Maybe try to eat a little more healthfully or consciously, and was told absolutely not. If I'm dying, I'm going to eat what I want to eat. I'm going to enjoy something in life. And I think so much enjoyment does come from the food we eat.
Oh, yeah.
And it can be done in a healthful way. But, if you think that an enjoyment is a Big Mac and a large fry and a large Diet Coke or a large Coke, probably not so much, right?
Yeah. And it's not to say, look, people are going to make their choices. I think, I always say, you do you, boo-boo. So if you want to eat junk, then you're more than welcome to. But understand the ramifications of that. And from a public policy standpoint, we are funding this stuff, and politicians deal with the symptoms and not the root causes. So, you show up and you call your legislators or your members of Congress or your governor or whomever it may be, and you complain about something thing that's going on in your life. I have a mental health condition and I cannot afford the pills to treat it. And no one ever says, well, maybe cut down on seed oils because that's impacting your stomach, which is impacting your mental health. No one talks about it. No one dares say that.
Yeah, that's
Instead,
weird.
the answer is we're going to go and pay for those treatments so that you don't have to worry about that.
Yeah.
And that there is a huge nexus between nutrition and the political community. And in fact, my favorite example of that happens to be several years ago. It just irritated the heck out of me. The senators from Idaho and New York were trying to get Greek yogurt into the public schools. And their argument was Greek yogurt is very, very nutritious. And so our kids should be able to have those in the school breakfast and lunch programs. And so they were petitioning the USDA to do something about that. And eventually the USDA said, yes, we will allow you to serve Greek yogurt in public schools throughout America. And Mike Crapo from Idaho and Chuck Schumer from New York celebrated this decision by the USDA to put Greek yogurt in the public schools, to which you should be asking, why in the hell do politicians and bureaucrats in Washington, D.C. have anything to say about what's served in the public schools? And then secondly, you should ask, is Greek yogurt really the healthiest thing you can think to feed to our kids? Why were they so determined to do that?
Well, you know why.
Because Chobani has plants in New York and Idaho, and so they wanted to appease their donors and the people that work at those plants that donate to those politicians. That's what it's all about. That's what it's always about.
Always what it's about.
So you really have to dig below the surface and understand, again, that it's not, we're not saying, you can't go do this or that you shouldn't, eat those foods. It's just understand there is a nexus between the political world, big medicine, and big agriculture. And in there somewhere is an impact on people's mental and physical health.
Yep.
And that has an impact on public policy, on the taxes that you pay, on the programs that you fund, and the well-being of the citizenry that subsidizes all of it.
Yep.
So there you go. Another rant for the day. That was a lot of fun because we've already tiptoed into the land of childbirth. So we thought, what should we talk about next? And
What should we talk about next?
And it's we did food. So I don't know what's coming next time, but
Stay tuned.
stay tuned. It'll be something I'm sure that's very controversial that'll get people angry with us. But thanks for joining me again, and
thanks for
thank you
having
all for watching another Hoff Time Report. And we'll talk to you again real soon.
You've been listening to the Hoff Time Report with Wayne Hoffman. Be sure to visit IdahoFreedom.org for Wayne's articles, IFF research, and show notes from today's episode.